The Ravenshire Manor blazed with light against the velvet darkness of the autumn evening, its hundreds of windows glowing like molten gold beneath a sky thick with gathering clouds. Carriages rolled endlessly up the curved drive, depositing lords, ladies, and ambitious mothers eager to secure advantageous introductions beneath the glittering splendor of the season's most anticipated gathering. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast rivers of light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet played from a raised gallery, their music floating above the murmur of conversation like silk drifting upon still water. At the center of it all stood Lady Eleanor Ashford. She wore no diamonds grand enough to command attention, nor did she possess the reckless beauty that inspired scandalous poetry. Yet wherever she moved, eyes followed. There was something quietly captivating about her, a dignity untouched by vanity, a kindness that neither sought nor required admiration. Men found themselves speaking more honestly in her presence. Women trusted her with secrets they would never entrust elsewhere. Even among the dazzling daughters of England's highest families, Eleanor carried a grace that could not be purchased or taught. Tonight, however, she carried something else. Hope. It rested carefully within her heart, fragile as blown glass. For nearly a year, whispers had linked her name with that of Duke Alexander Ravensshire. Neither had encouraged the gossip, yet neither had denied it. Society had watched every dance, every conversation, every lingering glance with relentless fascination. The Duke himself was a figure who inspired endless speculation. Wealthy beyond imagination, devastatingly handsome, and possessed of a reserve that bordered on coldness, he had rejected countless ambitious families seeking to secure his favor. Yet with Eleanor he seemed different. His expression softened. His silences warmed. His attention lingered. And tonight, many believed what Eleanor scarcely dared admit even to herself, that Alexander intended to ask for her hand before the evening ended. The possibility filled her with equal measures of anticipation and terror. Across the ballroom, ladies exchanged knowing smiles whenever her gaze drifted toward the Duke's absence. More than once, she caught older matrons studying her with expressions that seemed almost congratulatory. Their certainty only deepened the nervous flutter in her chest. Charlotte Ashford noticed it too. Eleanor's younger sister stood beside a marble column, radiant in pale pink silk that perfectly complemented her golden curls. At 20, Charlotte possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations. Men admired her openly. Women envied her effortlessly. Yet beneath her charming smile lurked something harder, something Eleanor had spent years pretending not to see. Charlotte watched her now with unusual intensity. "You seem distracted, sister," she said lightly. Eleanor offered a gentle smile. "Do I? A little." The answer carried an edge hidden beneath sweetness. Before Eleanor could respond, Charlotte's attention shifted elsewhere. Her smile widened mysteriously. Then she disappeared into the crowd. The evening continued. Guests danced. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings. Yet one detail gradually began troubling Eleanor. Alexander was nowhere to be found. At first she assumed he had been detained by guests or family obligations. An event of this scale demanded constant attention from its host. But as the minutes stretched into nearly an hour, concern quietly replaced patience. She searched the ballroom, the supper room, the library. Nothing. A peculiar unease settled over her. Finally, seeking a moment away from the noise, she stepped into a corridor leading toward the conservatory. The sounds of the celebration faded behind her as she walked beneath softly glowing wall sconces. Beyond the glass doors ahead, moonlight mingled with candlelight among exotic flowers and climbing roses. Then she heard voices. One belonged unmistakably to Charlotte. The other belonged to Alexander. Eleanor slowed. Her pulse quickened. She had no wish to eavesdrop, yet something in Charlotte's tone stopped her. Breathless. Intimate. Wrong. The conservatory doors stood slightly open. A curtain of flowering vines obscured part of the room beyond. Eleanor took one more step, and froze. Time seemed to lose all meaning. Alexander stood near the fountain at the room's center. Charlotte stood in his arms. His hand rested against her waist. Her fingers curled around his collar. And before Eleanor's horrified gaze, Charlotte rose onto her toes and kissed him. The world became silent. Not quieter. Silent. The music vanished. The laughter vanished. Even the beating of Eleanor's heart seemed to disappear. Only the image remained. Alexander and Charlotte together beneath golden candlelight. A beautiful betrayal framed like a painting. For one impossible second, Eleanor simply stared. Then movement erupted around her. Several guests entering the conservatory from another corridor halted abruptly upon witnessing the same scene. Shock rippled through the small gathering. A lady gasped audibly. Someone whispered Charlotte's name. The silence shattered. Whispers multiplied instantly. Questions. Speculation. Scandal. Charlotte broke the kiss first. Her gaze swept the room. Then found Eleanor. Triumph flashed briefly across her face. Alexander turned. The moment he saw Eleanor standing there, all color drained from his features. Eleanor. The single word sounded strangled. But the damage was done. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Everyone waited. For tears. For outrage. For humiliation. For collapse. Instead, Eleanor smiled. The expression cost her more than anyone present could possibly understand. With remarkable composure, she stepped forward. "Charlotte," she said softly, "accept my congratulations." The room fell utterly still. Charlotte blinked. Alexander looked as though the floor had vanished beneath him. Eleanor offered a graceful nod to them both. Not another word escaped her lips. Not a single accusation. Not a single plea. She turned and walked away. The whispers followed her through the manor like shadows. Minutes later, rain lashed against the carriage windows as she departed Ravensshire Manor forever, her hands folded neatly in her lap while her heart broke in perfect silence. Behind her, within the blazing house she had left behind, a stunned Duke stared after the disappearing carriage. Then, without explanation, he abandoned the celebration entirely and rushed into the storm, as though he had suddenly realized he was about to lose something far more precious than anyone yet understood. Morning arrived beneath a veil of gray clouds, but no weather could rival the storm gathering within London's drawing rooms. By breakfast, the story had already escaped Ravensshire Manor. Before noon, it had acquired embellishments. By evening, it had become society's favorite entertainment. Lady Eleanor Ashford's humiliation traveled faster than any carriage. Women discussed it over tea with carefully concealed delight. Gentlemen exchanged theories inside their clubs. Newspapers, unable to print names directly, hinted at a broken courtship involving a prominent duke and two sisters from a distinguished family. The omissions fooled no one. Every whispered conversation reopened the wound. Eleanor endured it with the same composure she had displayed inside the conservatory. Yet dignity carried its own exhaustion. Each sympathetic glance felt like a fresh reminder. Each silence concealed judgment. Every invitation that arrived seemed motivated by curiosity rather than affection. 3 weeks passed. She withdrew from society whenever possible and took refuge at Ashford House, the family's country estate. There, autumn painted the countryside in amber and gold. Leaves drifted across winding paths. Mist hovered above quiet fields at dawn. The world appeared peaceful, yet her heart remained unsettled. She tried not to think about Alexander Ravensshire. She failed daily. What tormented her most was not anger but confusion. The expression on his face after the kiss refused to leave her memory. She had expected guilt. Instead she had seen shock. Even now she could recall the way the color vanished from his features when he saw her standing in the doorway. It made no sense. She repeatedly reminded herself that betrayal required no explanation. Yet questions lingered. One rainy afternoon a parcel arrived. The package bore no signature. Curiosity overcame hesitation. Inside rested a velvet box. Eleanor opened it carefully. Nestled upon dark fabric lay an antique gold locket, exquisitely crafted and untouched by modern fashion. When she pressed the hidden clasp, the lid sprang open. Inside rested a single pressed forget-me-not. Nothing else. No letter. No name. No clue. She stared at the tiny flower for several moments. The gift unsettled her more than it pleased her. Someone clearly wished to remain anonymous. Yet the gesture felt deeply personal. She locked the locket away and resolved to think no more about it. 2 days later, another package arrived. This time she discovered a first-edition volume of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Several passages had been discreetly marked with silk ribbons. One particular verse caught her attention. It spoke of misunderstandings, lost chances, and hearts separated by pride rather than absence of love. Again, no signature accompanied the gift. Again, no explanation appeared. The mystery deepened. Weeks passed. More offerings followed. White roses arrived every Sunday morning. A beautifully carved music box appeared one evening, its delicate melody hauntingly familiar. A rare collection of pressed wildflowers arrived with no note attached. Each gift seemed chosen by someone who knew her preferences intimately. Someone who understood details she rarely shared. The realization should have comforted her. Instead it filled her with unease. Only a handful of people knew her well enough to select such thoughtful treasures. One of them was Alexander. Meanwhile, society developed an entirely different theory. Rumors spread with astonishing speed. According to popular gossip, the Duke of Ravensshire was secretly courting a lady whose identity remained hidden. Servants claimed mysterious purchases had been made from prestigious jewelers. Florists whispered about extravagant orders. Speculation consumed every social gathering. Most assumed Charlotte Ashford was the intended recipient. Charlotte did little to discourage the assumption. Indeed, she appeared positively delighted by it. Whenever her name appeared beside Alexander's in conversation, a satisfied smile touched her lips. Yet weeks became months and no engagement announcement arrived. That absence gradually became its own scandal. Questions multiplied. Why had the Duke not proposed? Why was Charlotte still unmarried? Why did Alexander avoid appearing beside her whenever possible? Observant members of society noticed another peculiar detail. The Duke himself seemed increasingly absent from fashionable circles. Once regarded as aloof, he now appeared distracted. At balls he spent little time dancing. At dinners he spoke less than usual. His attention appeared fixed upon something beyond the reach of everyone around him. The mystery surrounding him grew. Winter arrived. London's social season reached its glittering peak. Invitations flooded every household of consequence. Eleanor accepted few. One invitation, however, proved impossible to decline. The Duchess of Hawthorne's annual charity gala stood among the most prestigious events of the season. Attendance was practically mandatory. Thus, on a snowy December evening, Eleanor once again entered a ballroom filled with chandeliers, music, and judgment. The moment she crossed the threshold, conversation subtly shifted. People watched. People remembered. People wondered. She ignored them. Years of discipline had taught her how. Hours passed peacefully enough. She danced when necessary, smiled when expected, answered questions with practiced elegance. Then everything changed. Alexander Ravensshire entered the ballroom. His arrival altered the atmosphere immediately. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Women adjusted their posture. Men observed carefully. Yet Alexander seemed unaware of any attention except one. His gaze found Eleanor almost instantly. Across the crowded ballroom their eyes met. The distance between them felt suddenly insignificant. For several seconds neither moved. Then Alexander began walking toward her. The crowd noticed. Whispers erupted instantly. Eleanor's pulse quickened despite herself. He stopped before her. The familiar scent of cedar and winter air surrounded him. For a moment neither spoke. Then he bowed. Formal. Elegant. Dangerously calm. Lady Eleanor. Duke Ravensshire. 1,000 unspoken emotions lingered between those simple greetings. Around them, society practically held its breath. Alexander extended his hand. Would you honor me with this dance? Shock rippled through nearby guests. Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct urged caution. Yet refusing him publicly would create an even greater spectacle. Reluctantly, she placed her gloved hand in his. The orchestra began a waltz. Together they moved across the polished floor. Hundreds of eyes followed. Neither spoke during the first several turns. The silence stretched. Finally Alexander broke it. London has become intolerably creative in its storytelling. A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips despite herself. It always has been. Then perhaps, he said quietly, guiding her through another turn, we ought to give society a story worth remembering. His words sent an unfamiliar shiver through her. She looked up. For the first time in months, she saw vulnerability behind his carefully controlled expression. Something urgent. Something unresolved. The music continued. The ballroom blurred around them. Then Alexander leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You saw something that evening, he murmured. His gaze never left hers. But you did not see the truth. The dance continued, yet the world seemed to stop moving around them. The words haunted Eleanor long after the music ended. You did not see the truth. For 3 nights she replayed them in her mind. They followed her through candlelit corridors, accompanied her during morning rides, and lingered beside her bedside long after the house had fallen silent. She wanted to dismiss them as another attempt to excuse betrayal. Pride urged her to ignore them entirely. Yet something deeper refused to comply. Alexander had not spoken like a guilty man. He had spoken like a desperate one. At last, curiosity overcame caution. A note arrived the following week, delivered by a trusted servant. The handwriting was unmistakably Alexander's. The message was brief. No declarations, no excuses, no demands. Only a request. He asked for one conversation. 1 hour. One opportunity to explain what had happened inside the conservatory. Against every instinct that had protected her for months, Eleanor agreed. The meeting was arranged at Ravensshire Manor, the same house where her humiliation had begun. Winter sunlight filtered weakly through gray clouds as her carriage approached the estate. Snow covered the grounds in a blanket of white, softening familiar landscapes without erasing painful memories. The manor itself rose from the frost like a silent monument to everything she had lost. Her pulse quickened as she entered. A servant escorted her to the library. The room glowed with warmth. A fire crackled behind a marble hearth. Thousands of leather-bound volumes lined towering shelves. Golden lamplight softened the shadows gathering between them. Alexander stood beside the window. For a moment neither moved. Months of silence filled the space between them. Then he stepped forward. "Thank you for coming." His voice carried genuine gratitude. Eleanor folded her hands carefully. "You wish to explain." A flicker of pain crossed his expression. Not because of her words, because of their distance. "Yes." Silence settled briefly. Then Alexander drew a measured breath. "The evening of the ball, I intended to propose." The confession landed like a stone dropped into still water. Eleanor stared. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Her breath caught. The ring inside glittered beneath the firelight. Not extravagant. Not ostentatious. Beautiful. Chosen with care rather than spectacle. "I purchased it 3 months before the ball," he said quietly. "I carried it with me that entire evening." Eleanor struggled to find words. Every certainty she had built since that night suddenly felt less secure. Alexander closed the box. "I never intended to court Charlotte." The statement emerged with absolute conviction. "Then why did I see what I saw?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. For the first time, genuine anger surfaced. Not toward her. Toward the memory itself. Because Charlotte arranged it. The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at him. Alexander walked slowly toward the fireplace, as though reliving events he despised. "She approached me in the conservatory shortly before I intended to find you. At first I believed she wished to discuss family matters. She appeared upset." His expression darkened. Then the conversation changed. Eleanor listened without interruption. "She told me she knew I intended to propose to you." The fire crackled softly. "She claimed you did not love me." Eleanor frowned. Alexander gave a humorless smile. "That was merely the beginning." He looked directly at her. "Charlotte informed me she believed herself better suited to become Duchess of Ravensshire." The words sounded absurd. Yet Eleanor knew her sister. Perhaps not as well as she once believed. But enough. A chill traveled through her. "I told her she was mistaken." Alexander's voice remained calm. "I made my feelings unmistakably clear." The silence that followed felt heavy. What happened then? For several moments he simply watched the flames. Then he answered. "She kissed me." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Alexander continued immediately. "I did not kiss her." The force behind the statement left no room for ambiguity. She stepped forward without warning. His hands clenched briefly. "I pushed her away the moment I recovered from the shock." The memory clearly disgusted him. Yet another question remained. If that is true, why did it appear otherwise? A shadow crossed his features. "Because she knew exactly where to position us." Understanding began forming slowly, painfully, like dawn emerging through dense fog. Alexander nodded. Several guests were already approaching the conservatory. Charlotte saw them before I did. The implications settled heavily between them. She wanted witnesses. Yes. Eleanor felt suddenly cold despite the fire. The entire scandal. The whispers. The humiliation. The destruction of trust. All of it had been engineered. Her chest tightened. Why? The question emerged almost as a whisper. Alexander's expression softened. Because envy rarely requires reason. The answer hurt more than she expected. Not because it condemned Charlotte. Because it sounded true. Silence stretched between them. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Inside, two wounded hearts confronted the wreckage left behind. At last Eleanor looked away. Months of grief resurfaced unexpectedly. "I believed you chose her." The confession felt strangely vulnerable. Alexander's expression changed instantly. Every trace of composure vanished. I never chose her. His voice was rough. Honest. I chose you long before that evening. The words settled deep within her. More powerful than any grand declaration. Because they carried no performance. No audience. Only truth. Emotion flickered across his face. Regret. Longing. Sorrow. I searched for your carriage that night. Eleanor looked up. I rode through the storm for hours. His gaze never left hers. When I finally returned, you had already decided what happened. Pain filled the silence. Neither blamed the other. Both understood. The evidence had seemed undeniable. Alexander moved closer. Not enough to presume. Only enough to be heard. I could endure your anger, Eleanor. His voice lowered. What I could not endure was your silence. The admission shattered something inside her. Not completely. But enough. Enough to allow possibility where certainty once existed. Enough to permit hope where only grief had survived. The conversation lasted another hour. They spoke not as strangers. Not yet as lovers. But as two people cautiously rebuilding a bridge that had collapsed between them. When Eleanor finally departed, the snow had stopped falling. For the first time in months, her heart felt lighter. Yet as her carriage disappeared down the drive, another figure watched from an upstairs window. Charlotte Ashford. Her expression held neither guilt nor regret. Only calculation. And when Eleanor later returned home, a sealed envelope awaited her arrival. Inside rested a newspaper clipping containing a single handwritten sentence in Charlotte's unmistakable script. If I cannot have him, sister, neither shall you. The threat lingered in Eleanor's mind long after she folded the newspaper clipping and locked it inside her writing desk. If I cannot have him, sister, neither shall you. The sentence was brief, yet it carried the weight of something dangerous. It was not written in anger. Anger burned hot and vanished quickly. This felt colder. Deliberate. Patient. For the first time, Eleanor stopped viewing Charlotte as a jealous younger sister whose ambitions had simply exceeded her judgment. The woman behind those words was willing to destroy lives to satisfy wounded pride. Winter deepened across England. Snow covered rooftops and gardens in pristine white, creating an illusion of peace that reality stubbornly refused to support. Beneath society's polished surface, rumors continued spreading with relentless speed. Some spoke of a reconciliation between Eleanor and the Duke. Others insisted Alexander remained secretly devoted to Charlotte. Every drawing room seemed to invent a different version of the truth. Yet for several weeks, nothing happened. The silence itself became unsettling. Alexander continued visiting Eleanor with increasing frequency. Their relationship remained cautious but undeniably warmer. They walked through frosted gardens. They exchanged letters. They spoke openly about hopes, fears, and regrets. The wounds between them had not fully healed, but trust was slowly returning. For the first time since the night of the conservatory, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future again. That was precisely when Charlotte struck. The scandal erupted on a Monday morning. By noon, London was in chaos. Newspapers carried carefully worded articles suggesting that a nobleman of extraordinary rank had secretly compromised the reputation of a young lady before abandoning his promise of marriage. No names appeared in print, but everyone recognized the people involved. Charlotte ensured they would. Within hours, private conversations became public accusations. According to her story, Alexander had courted her in secret for months. He had professed love. He had promised marriage. Then, after securing her affection, he had cruelly abandoned her in favor of her older sister. The allegations spread like wildfire. Society adored scandal. It worshipped betrayal. By evening, the Duke of Ravensshire stood accused in every fashionable salon in London. Eleanor first learned of it through her aunt's trembling voice. "What monstrous nonsense," her aunt whispered. Yet even she sounded uncertain. That uncertainty terrified Eleanor more than outright condemnation, because she understood society. Facts mattered less than appearances, and appearances were dangerous. When Alexander arrived at Ashford House later that evening, exhaustion shadowed his face. For several moments they stood alone inside the drawing room. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The crisis already surrounded them. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "Did you ever encourage her?" Alexander's expression hardened. "No." The answer came instantly. Without hesitation. Without qualification. "I have never spoken a single word to Charlotte that could reasonably be mistaken for affection." Eleanor studied him carefully. His frustration was genuine. His anger was controlled but unmistakable. Most importantly, she believed him. The realization surprised her. Months earlier she would have questioned everything. Now she did not. That trust represented something precious. Something Charlotte had failed to destroy. Alexander walked toward the window. Outside, snowflakes drifted through the darkness. "If this continues," he said quietly, "my title will survive." His jaw tightened. "But your reputation may not." The truth settled heavily between them. Victorian society rarely forgave women caught within scandal, regardless of innocence. Eleanor understood exactly what was at stake. "So what shall we do?" Alexander turned. A different expression appeared in his eyes. Determination. "We tell the truth." The following week became a battle fought not with weapons but with whispers. Alexander refused to hide. He attended every public engagement, every dinner, every gathering. Rather than retreating from scrutiny, he walked directly into it. People expected embarrassment. Instead they encountered confidence. Questions multiplied. Doubts emerged. Charlotte's story began developing cracks. Then came the first unexpected witness. A footman from Ravensshire Manor approached Alexander privately. The man had remained silent for months, fearing dismissal and controversy. Yet conscience eventually outweighed fear. He revealed that he had seen Charlotte deliberately positioning herself near the conservatory entrance before the infamous incident. Others soon followed. A maid recalled Charlotte asking detailed questions about guest movements that evening. Another servant remembered seeing her watch approaching visitors through a glass panel moments before the kiss. Individually, the details seemed insignificant. Together, they formed something undeniable. A pattern, a plan, a trap. Word spread rapidly. Public opinion began shifting. The climax arrived during the Winter Charity Ball, one of the season's grandest social events. Hundreds attended. Nobility filled the glittering ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers. The atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. Everyone knew revelations were coming. Everyone wanted to witness them. Alexander entered shortly after 9. Conversations ceased almost immediately. Charlotte arrived minutes later. For the first time, uncertainty flickered behind her confident smile. She sensed the mood changing. What she did not yet understand was how completely. Before the assembled guests, Alexander requested permission to address the room. The ballroom fell silent. His voice carried effortlessly across the vast chamber. He spoke calmly, respectfully, without cruelty. Witness after witness stepped forward. Servants gave statements. Timelines were established. Contradictions emerged. Facts replaced rumors. The carefully constructed illusion collapsed piece by piece. Every revelation weakened Charlotte's position. Every truth strengthened Alexander's. At last, the weight of evidence became impossible to deny. The room understood. The kiss had been staged. The scandal had been manufactured. The accusations were lies. Charlotte stood motionless beneath hundreds of staring eyes. The triumph she once wore so proudly had vanished completely. In its place remained only humiliation. Eleanor watched quietly. A strange sadness touched her heart. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Sadness. Because despite everything, Charlotte was still her sister. The room waited for condemnation. Society expected cruelty. Instead, Eleanor stepped forward. Her voice remained gentle. "Bitterness may satisfy a wounded heart," she said softly, "but it cannot heal one." The words silenced the ballroom. Charlotte lowered her gaze. For the first time she looked defeated. Not by scandal. By grace. A profound stillness settled across the room. The conflict that had consumed months of their lives finally appeared finished. Truth had prevailed. Reputations had been restored. The future seemed clear at last. Then Alexander moved. Before anyone understood his intention, he crossed the ballroom floor and stopped directly before Eleanor. The vast crowd parted around them. Candlelight glittered above. Hundreds of witnesses watched in breathless silence. And as shock swept through the room, the Duke of Ravensshire slowly lowered himself onto one knee, reached into his coat, and withdrew the same velvet box he had carried on the night everything fell apart. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Hundreds of guests stood frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers as Alexander Ravensshire knelt before Eleanor Ashford. The music had fallen silent. Even the servants lining the walls appeared suspended in time. Only the Duke moved. The velvet box rested in his hand. The same box he had carried on the night everything had fallen apart. The same ring that had waited through months of heartbreak, misunderstanding, and longing. Eleanor stared at it without speaking. For a moment, the noise of the world disappeared. She saw only him. Not the Duke. Not one of England's most powerful men. Not the figure society admired and feared in equal measure. She saw the man who had ridden through a storm searching for her. The man who had endured public humiliation rather than retaliate against her sister. The man who had waited patiently while she learned how to trust him again. The man she had never truly stopped loving. Alexander looked up at her. Emotion flickered openly across his face. For perhaps the first time in his life, he appeared completely vulnerable. "I had intended to ask you this question months ago." His voice carried through the silent ballroom. Steady. Sincere. Without performance. But life, it seems, possessed other plans. A faint ripple of laughter moved through the guests before fading once more. Alexander never looked away from Eleanor. "The night I lost you, I discovered something I should have understood long before." The room remained utterly still. Every eye fixed upon him. Yet he seemed unaware of anyone else. Titles, estates, influence, wealth. His voice softened. "None of them meant anything when I believed I had lost you." Emotion tightened Eleanor's chest. The sincerity behind his words was impossible to doubt. Alexander opened the velvet box. The diamond caught the light like a captured star. "I spent months regretting every moment that separated us." His gaze remained fixed upon hers. "Months wishing I had reached you sooner." A faint tremor entered his voice. "The world knows me as a duke." His expression softened. "But the truth is far simpler." A gentle smile touched his lips. "I am merely a man who loves you." The confession settled over the ballroom like a blessing. No one moved. No one spoke. Even society's most notorious gossips seemed incapable of interrupting the moment. Alexander drew a careful breath. Then came the words Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. "The night I lost you, I discovered that every title I possess is worthless beside your affection." The statement hung in the air. Powerful. Honest. Unforgettable. Eleanor felt tears gather despite every effort to maintain composure. For months she had protected herself behind caution. Behind dignity. Behind fear. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of trusting the wrong person. Fear of believing in happiness only to watch it disappear. Now, standing before him, she realized something. Alexander had been fighting his own fears. His own regrets. His own loneliness. Neither of them had emerged from the scandal unchanged. Yet somehow they had emerged stronger. The room disappeared around her. Only Alexander remained. Only the man kneeling before her. Only the future waiting between them. A small smile touched her lips. The same smile that had hidden heartbreak months earlier. But this smile carried something entirely different. "Oh, I believe," she said softly, "you have kept me waiting quite long enough, Your Grace." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. Relief followed. Warm and immediate. Alexander blinked. For a brief second, disbelief crossed his features. Then understanding dawned. Joy followed instantly. A rare, unguarded joy Eleanor had never seen before. "Is that a yes?" The question sounded almost boyish. The mighty Duke of Ravensshire suddenly seemed far less intimidating. Eleanor's eyes sparkled. "Yes." The single word transformed everything. Applause erupted. Cheers followed. The ballroom exploded with celebration. Ladies dabbed tears from their eyes. Gentlemen smiled openly. Even those who had once delighted in scandal found themselves moved by the sincerity of the moment. Alexander rose to his feet. For a heartbeat neither spoke. Then he took her hand and gently slid the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit. As though it had always belonged there. The crowd continued applauding. Yet neither seemed aware of it. They stood together at the center of the ballroom, surrounded by light, music, and happiness hard-won through suffering. For the first time since the night of the conservatory, peace settled between them completely. Not because the past had vanished, but because they had survived it. The engagement dominated every newspaper in England. Yet this time the headlines carried admiration rather than scandal. Public opinion shifted dramatically. What had once been a story of betrayal became a story of perseverance. Months later, winter returned. The wedding took place on a clear December afternoon beneath snow-covered skies. Church bells echoed across the countryside. Guests filled the ancient chapel with candlelight and anticipation. Eleanor walked down the aisle wearing ivory silk and family lace passed through generations. Alexander waited at the altar. The sight of him brought tears to her eyes. Not because she doubted. Because she did not. Every hardship had led them here. Every misunderstanding. Every sacrifice. Every choice. When they exchanged vows, the chapel felt touched by something sacred. Not perfection. Something stronger. Commitment. Trust. Love tested and proven. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently from the heavens. The newly married Duke and Duchess emerged beneath a shower of blessings and applause. Their carriage carried them toward Ravenshire Manor as twilight painted the world in silver and gold. Months passed. Spring eventually softened the landscape. Under Eleanor's guidance, the estate flourished. Gardens expanded. Charitable projects multiplied. Tenants prospered. The household transformed into a place of warmth rather than formality. Alexander often joked that she had accomplished more in a season than generations of dukes before her. Yet his admiration was never truly a joke. He meant every word. One winter evening nearly a year after their wedding, they stood together in the manor gardens beneath a sky crowded with stars. Snow blanketed the grounds. Golden light spilled from the windows behind them. The world felt quiet, peaceful, complete. Alexander wrapped his coat around Eleanor's shoulders. She leaned comfortably against him. Neither felt any need to speak immediately. At length, Eleanor looked toward the heavens. "It seems impossible," she murmured, "that everything began with heartbreak." Alexander smiled. "Not heartbreak." She turned toward him. His eyes reflected the starlight. With courage. Emotion warmed her chest. After everything they had endured, she finally understood. The greatest victory had never been exposing lies. It had never been restoring reputations. It had never been winning society's approval. The greatest victory had been refusing to let bitterness define them. Together they gazed across the snow-covered estate. The future stretched before them like an unwritten chapter. Bright, promising, endless. And as the stars glittered above Ravenshire Manor, the Duke and Duchess stood hand in hand, no longer separated by whispers, misunderstandings, or fear, but united by a love strong enough to survive scandal, heartbreak, and time itself, a love that had finally found its proper season to bloom.